Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Big View, Ending Poverty in Your Community. At Circles, our mission is building community to end poverty through intentional friendships, personal transformation, and systemic change, led by the people closest to the challenge. And our vision for the future is all individuals live in equitable and thriving communities where poverty no longer exists.
All right. Welcome, everyone. This is The Big View with Circles USA, and this is our special episode number 2 on effective systems change. So, my name is Kris Alexander. I am the Chief Learning Officer at Circles USA, and today I am so excited to be joined by our Executive Director, Kamatara Johnson, and Michelle Crawford, who is the executive director of Circle Salt Lake and really a systems change guru. And we are so excited to have her coming on today as a guest. She has incredible information for us and experience in this realm. And it's just going to be a fantastic conversation today. So, to begin, my first question for us today is, what is systems change? That we're just going to begin really simply because I think a lot of people have a lot of ideas about what it is and is not. So let's just get real clear on what is systems change.
If I could kick it off just in general, and then maybe Michelle can take us more specific into it. But when we think about systems change, oftentimes it's really abstract and it's so big and it's so gnarly that it's hard to even wrap our heads around it. But when we remember that systems are created by people, and that if we understand who are the people who are touching the system, have impact on the system, could tweak it, move it, shift it, then actually systems change is people change. And then that's where we have the gold, because circles is all about relationships, and that's how you work with people. So I guess the big mantra for me when it comes to systems change is that systems change is people change. So has that been your experience, Michelle?
Interesting. Yes. I mean, and I love all that you said, because when I think about systems change, key words that you said, primarily people. I know when I presented to our group of circle leaders in Salt Lake, trying to identify barriers and asking them what obstacles are in their way. And one of the barriers I listed was systems. And that was a little bit confusing for people. What systems, right? So when I think about systems change, I have to think about what systems or system are we talking about? So what's at the root of that system? And then who are the key parties who touch that system, are touched by that system? And then systems change for me is making sure that we're including everybody that's part of the system that we're referring to, and taking everybody's input and everybody's experience, and making a change that benefits everyone.
I love how that makes it more concrete. Like instead of looking at everything, can we pull out the appropriate size picture frame and say, okay, we're looking at this system that does these things. It impacts these people, and these are the folks who could shift it or have some say around it. So again, it pulls us out of the abstract into, oh, this is actionable. I could do something here. It makes it seem possible. But I also really appreciated that you said when you listen to circle leaders, so people with the lived experience of poverty, what are they experiencing? Because oftentimes, I might think I know, but then I listen to people who are having the experience and I think, oh, I never would have thought of that, or I didn't understand that's where you're getting stuck, or that, oh, so that's amazing to center the voice of people closest to the challenge.
Yeah. Well, and I love also the reminder that we're all a part of the system. I feel like so often when people start talking about systems and systems that are broken or not working, it's they over there are doing this thing to us and we're like outside of it or don't have influence or impact. But that's not true at all, right? Like you said, Michelle, the system is the people, and you're either influencing or being influenced by the system or impacting the system and being impacted by the system, or both, and so the goal is really to raise up those people that are more on the impacted side and lift them up to a place where they can impact the system, because the system is people.
Right. Yeah, and so they know that they can.
Right.
I might get us off rails for a second, but I'll never forget coming into my role, not as a volunteer, but actually as staff for my chapter when that switch happened, and having a big view meeting and talking to the circle leaders there, because we were bringing in one of our local elected officials to come and talk about the barriers that we were experiencing. And this woman, a circle leader, just got this look of terror on her face. So I checked in and said, "What's going on? How are you feeling?" And she just said, "So they're coming here." And I said, "Of course they are. They want to come talk to you." She was moved to tears. She
Mm.
said, "I never realized that I even had that option, or that they that you're talking about, Kris, right,
Mhm.
would want to hear from me, or that they would come here to us and talk to us." And it was so incredible to get to tell her, like, you're the reason, right, that we do this, and that you do have a voice. Absolutely, you're a constituent, and these people, the theys that you're talking about, they represent you, and so they can't represent you if they don't get to hear from you. And so I love to just make sure that people know that the system is all of us. We all have a part in it.
Absolutely. And just for people who may be listening to this podcast, because it goes out all over the place, we keep using the term circle leader. And so, circle leader is the term that we use for the people in our programs who are working to get out of poverty. And so, when you hear circle leader, those are really the folks that are closest to the challenge of poverty. They're having the lived, or they had the lived experience of poverty, and so those are the voices that we're talking about amplifying. So if you're listening to this podcast and thinking about maybe a different system that you're working to impact or shift, input whoever those with the lived experiences in for circle leader when you hear that term. Uh, yeah,
Also exciting to think about this as that leadership opportunity to be
absolutely.
seen, to be heard, to say, oh, I am an expert because I have had this experience. And so it is a little bridge for folks who have traditionally been marginalized or silenced or just ignored, and to say, oh yeah, I do have a voice, I do matter, I am an expert, and here's a gentle pathway, like there's some scaffolding to support me to be able to share my story or to share my insights directly with my representatives or community leaders. We don't usually, there's not a lot of spaces where you can do that, especially with support and the connections.
Mhm.
So I really would encourage anyone who has relationships with their policymakers and community leaders, like, can you create that safe place for people to come together and share the story, or create the scaffolding that would support folks who aren't used to speaking to their policymaker? What can we do to support people to have a really positive connection, positive experience, and start building trust?
Absolutely. And I think the last thing that I just kind of want to pull out from what we've been talking about is when Michelle was talking about kind of breaking the systems down. I think so often when we talk about systems or systems change, we tend to think of the really huge ones, right? And we tend to, when we start talking about like constituencies and politicians and lawmakers, we tend to think about the people that are doing the national work. And so often the difference begins in the local levels with our local policymakers and our local communities. And for the most part, for the purposes of this conversation, the government officials, the lawmakers, they really want to do what's best, right? They really want to support their constituents. They're there because they really do want to be in a place of service. And so by creating those scaffolds and creating that bridge for people to come together, it's really a gift not only to the people having the lived experiences, but also to the people who can make an impact because they want to know what they need to do to make their community a better place. So it's really something that is beneficial to all. And the more that I get into systems change work and the more research I do and the more people I talk to, they're so excited when people reach out and say, "Hey, we want you to come so we can talk to you and tell you what's going on in your community." So it's really when we break it down and when we remember that they're people at the heart of systems and when we break it down like Michelle said into bite-sized pieces of what system are we looking at, it actually becomes way more simple than we think it's going to be. And it becomes something that everybody involved is really happy to be involved in the process. I wanted to talk about the effective strategies, right? Like we talk about effective systems change because Christy Vines, the CEO, I believe that's her title, CEO or executive director of Ideas Institute. She talks about, the tanker ship versus like the motorboat and like what system are you trying to affect. And so if you're sitting there just banging on the side of a tanker ship, we're not going to move the direction of it. So, how are we actually effective? What does it take to be effective in our systems change work?
Well, I would take this back to something we've already touched on, which is starting at the root. So what's at the root of the change that we're trying to impact? And I hope with that we're first looking at the people who are impacted by the system. We want effective systems change. And so without, like you said, Kamatara, I may have been raised in poverty. I may have experienced poverty as an adult, but if I'm not currently experiencing poverty right now, things are changing. And at the same time, things aren't changing, right? A lot of our systems are antiquated. And so, but how does it affect us today in today's world, in today's economy, in today's communities that are surrounding us? We have a very different world than I think any of us have really ever experienced, right? If we, people are tired of hearing about the pandemic, but you can't say that's not still impacting how we interact with each other as a community. People are still relearning how to work together, how to be together, how to socialize together, how to build that community. There's still some division, and it was kind of forced on us, and now we're getting better at it and we're getting back together, but we've forgotten some things about how each other is affected, or just realizing that something that affects me may not be affecting the person that lives next door to me. And so for me, going to the root. So for me, I think it's easy, right? We're trying to eradicate poverty. So then you address what barriers are in the way, and are those barriers systemic? Absolutely they are. Are they policy related? Some of them probably are. And then what are the solutions? So for me, eradicating poverty, right? Like that's pretty easy. We know what the barriers are. And we know that because we talk to the people experiencing poverty. And right now, I don't know anybody who's not feeling the impact of increased prices, right, for consumer goods and housing and access to things that we need for our health, our mental health, our emotional health, our physical health. Like everybody is feeling that and experiencing that. So it's identifying what those barriers are, and then coming up with what solutions we can propose, and how do we go about testing those solutions? Because again, we may think we know what's best. It may make perfect sense when you write it out on a piece of paper, but when you actually try to go through the change to the system that you're impacting, you're probably going to learn. It's not all, oops, that didn't work the way that we thought that it would, or that really didn't have the outcome that we wanted. And then giving ourselves grace. And when I say us, I'm talking about every person that gets to touch the system's change. Giving ourselves grace to know, okay, that didn't work out, and now we get to pivot. Let's try it this way. And we can't give up. So we just keep going until we find the solution that benefits everyone.
I appreciate the mindset that you're bringing up, that there's, a few different mindsets that are helpful. First to consider the long game here, because it's not going to be instantaneous or a quick fix. Like it really is that long game. And that's why the relationships over time are really important, and listening to each other and trust. It's really important, because even if we were to change a policy, unless the mindset and the culture and the sense of community, like if that doesn't change, it doesn't matter what law just got put into place or what new fandangled thing we're going to try out. So it needs to have almost the internal infrastructure as much as it needs the external to be put into place. So and having the empathic intelligence, as the IDEOS Institute has taught us all about, empathic intelligence, that I could be open to what other people might be experiencing or thinking, or, how is this impacting folks? And then can we influence it? We like to say you have to have both eyes open. I can influence it, and it has impact. And who is it impacting? How do we influence it? So really getting into just understanding where's the common ground. Because when I speak to, let's say, my representatives in New Mexico, where I'm at, they have key priorities and things that they're looking for. But the priorities that I have, they probably align. So if we can find that common ground, and I have the empathic intelligence to understand where they're coming from, I can find that place where we can have those communications and start making plans together and collaborate, as opposed to being combative. Like, how do we build, coalitions and move together in the same direction? Because we do want the same thing. We all want thriving communities and thriving families. But a lot of it is the mindset that can happen inside of the relationship.
Oh, and that mindset. Like
Mhm.
it's so simple, but has become so complicated, because we can talk all day about mindset. We can do trainings and get people pumped up about changing mindset. But for me, it really does come down to building community. Um, and I sound like I just want to be a commercial for the organization that I represent, right? But it's true, and it's what brought me to Circles as a volunteer for 5 years, and then before deciding to move from corporate to nonprofit, because to me that really is what is so desperately needed right now. So if we're building community, if we're connecting people, not just in Circles, I'm talking about if you're watching this and you're listening in, like, do you know your neighbors? When's the last time you said hello to everyone that you passed in the grocery store? When's the last time you did something, or have you ever done something so big and bold and scary yet exciting and thrilling to invite someone to lunch who has different viewpoints than you do, or someone who you really don't even know where they stand on anything? Because it's easy to form these opinions and not really understand where someone's coming from if we're not getting to know them. But you get to know somebody as a person, and then all of a sudden, it's not so hard that they maybe have some different opinions or a different mindset on something. But man, if you can walk away from a grocery store interaction or a lunch with someone who you don't really know that well, or who maybe has a difference of opinion, but you got to know that person, as a human, I'd be willing to bet that the pushback that we get, the encounters you're talking about, Kamatara, that do happen, like, I think that would change. And then what happens then, right? When as a society, we're more uplifting to each other, and we're more understanding of each other, and like getting to the common ground there seems a lot more simple to me than it is right now.
Absolutely. I love this conversation so much. I'm just kind of listening to y'all. The first thing that comes to my mind is Brene Brown. I'm obsessed with Brene Brown's work. But she says, people are hard to hate up close, so lean in, right? And so that's what you're talking about, Michelle, is like once we lean into each other, we see that we have way more in common than otherwise. And it's, to me, the leaning in, so getting really close to each other, and it's also kind of the pulling out, because if we look at the big picture, all of us kind of want the same thing, right? Like we want the ability to have a good life, and we want, I mean, I don't know anyone really, I mean, maybe they're out there, but I don't think so, that would be like, no, I want people to suffer, right? Like I want people to stay in poverty. If you look at the big picture, like if you look at the vision of circles, which is that we live in a poverty-free society, everybody's going to agree with that. So it's like we start at the massive picture, and then we lean into the individuals, and we go from there. It's when we kind of stay in this middle ground of us versus them, or you voted for this person, so you must believe these things, that we get into trouble, because we forget that really when we lean in, we find things in common, and when we pull out, we find things in common. So being willing to move and shift our perspective out of the one that maybe we've been sort of socialized to think in most of the time, and that we see most of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just really thinking about, who can I get to know? Who do I need to know? Who's missing from this conversation? And then how can I lean in and get to know them in a way that's going to be supportive?
And we can even start with what do we need to know? What do I need to know? Because maybe I'm not ready to go meet new people. Maybe I'm not ready to hear, right? Because I'm still skeptical about poverty. There's a lot of that. So um, I agree. I don't think there's anybody who really wants to see other humans suffer, but there's a lot of misconception and a lot of unknown from about people in poverty. So you can, right? Because I hear it a lot. When I stepped into this role and was in a meeting with some high level business owners, and one of them asked, like, "Oh, is your work really hard? Because do they really want to change?" I was so excited about her question because that to me clearly spoke to she's probably never experienced a day in poverty or walked a path with someone who has. And so it was exciting for me to say, oh, absolutely. But it's not really the change that they need to do. It's support that they need. It's the community. That's what we're building. And started talking about the barriers that people experience. That the people who have come to my chapter of circles aren't forced there. They're not court ordered. They weren't mandated to come there. They chose to be there, and they're making the decision and they're leading their path out of poverty because that's what they want for their families. And they're not coming for handouts. We don't give them we're not paying their bills for them. We're not handing them, cash. These are people who have said, I need help. And really the help that we give is that community. So, you may not be ready to be in a place to meet somebody in poverty and understand their story, but start with understanding what causes poverty, what causes people to stay in poverty, and what systems are impacting those barriers for our community members to get out of poverty. And it opens eyes. I think a lot of people, like I'm saying, if you haven't experienced or walked along the path with somebody who has experienced it, you probably don't know. And I can give grace there. I've learned a ton being involved in circles and working directly with our circle leaders, again, the people who are leading their path out of poverty, about what that experience is like. And I was raised in poverty. I thought this will be easy coming into this, and went, oh, no, it's not. Things are very different.
I appreciate the space that circles gives us, not only to understand each other better, to gain that individualized perception, it also gives us the space to practice listening, to practice speaking up, to practice being in community together, to really have dialogue that can be really generative, and to practice collaboration, or to there's so little space where we get to practice being in community together, and sometimes it's hard and sometimes it's easier, or having those myths and stereotypes and walls just disintegrate once we get together and break bread together and start to see each other as individuals and have that deepened understanding. It just seems at the heart of community building and systems change. So I really wonder, no matter what organization someone is with, whoever is listening to this podcast, do you have a space where you can bring people together and break bread or do something together? Invite policymakers and community leaders to an event where they can serve food or do the dishes or set up tables or offer hospitality, like no agenda, just could we be together and really get to know, like, who are the people in our neighborhood, who are the people who are my representatives, do I know their names, do they know me? So having the opportunity to come together is such a powerful first step.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Michelle.
Oh, I'm just saying, I agree. And I can't help but like this vision in my head, Kamatara, when you say that, like in a community space, could you bring in people of all different walks of life? Could you bring in people different levels of where their income is? Could you bring in, the elected officials and like, I don't know, I think with fun little speed dating, like,
Yes.
but not speed, but not fast, not speedy. Like sit down with somebody who you've never met before, who is walking a different path of life, and have a 20-minute conversation with no agenda. That gets me excited because, when I invite people, guests to come into our circles meetings for our chapter, we have an agenda. There's a topic we want to talk about. There's a format we're following, but oh my gosh, really? If you could just sit down and if somebody could provide that, if you can provide that community space and just bring in all different walks of life and have people sit and just talk, like, oh, I've got chills, and like, look, that is community, and what happens after that, like, it's beautiful. And we've just forgotten, I think, sometimes that we do, Kris, we all have so much more in common than we realize or think about.
And that's where we stop the wild pendulum swings, the us versus them, all the binaries, that the false dilemmas, only this or that, the black and white thinking, the all or nothing thinking, like some of the things that are not mindsets that are helpful. But, as a nonpartisan organization, we want to bring people together across all the different aspects of our identity, of our lives, of our beliefs, all of that, like bringing everyone together stops those wild pendulum swings, because then we can work together to find community-driven solutions that work. And then there's the buy-in, and that's where the inner change happens to support the outer change that could happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I want to go back and just add one little piece, which is it's kind of my personal soapbox, but it is on topic, I promise. Michelle, when you were talking about people asking you, is it so hard to work with these people because they don't want to change? Which once again, there's that pesky they, right? There's a couple of things. First, I also love that question because curiosity is our biggest superpower, right? Like that person was willing to listen to something different other than maybe what they think, even if it wasn't that conscious, but just asking the question opens the door. So first of all, curiosity, the more questions we can ask. And also, and this is the personal soapbox, is I think oftentimes we accidentally identify hopelessness as apathy. And so we look at people who um, aren't doing what we think they should be doing or aren't trying to change their lives, and we think they're apathetic or that they don't want to change, when actually what they're really experiencing is hopelessness from trying for probably their whole lives to have changes and keeping like running into those barriers. And so I think if we can just change that one mindset in ourselves, anytime we look at somebody and think they don't care or they're apathetic, instead be like, wow, I wonder if they're experiencing hopelessness and what brought them to that place. So once again, going back to that curiosity of what can I learn about this person, to learn more about why they are where they are, what got them to this place where I'm looking and going, well, you don't even want to change. Well, no, that's probably not true. So what is true? So that's I every time I'm just like, it's hopelessness, it's hopelessness. We can do something about that. We can help. We can, hope is a and this is something we've been working with Dr. Evie Trevino, and that hope can is a skill that can be developed, and it's also something that can be depleted, right? And so if we see people that have depleted hope, we can do something about that. We can support them in building up hope. And then all of a sudden, we're like, they're not apathetic. They just didn't know where else to go. They were hopeless, right? Anyways, that's my side note.
Love it. How can we build hope also for the community leaders and policymakers? Because they too might be depleted or feeling like, oh, this is so hard, or I don't know what direction, or it's just too big, or it's almost both ways. How do we build hope all the way across the community so that way we're uplifting each other and feeling that interdependence? That's part of what I love about circles bringing people together, that we're restoring faith in humanity instead of the negativity and the fear and the divisiveness and some of the things that society is out there spinning right now. And we say, no, that's not the truth. That's not the truth for us, not the truth for our community, and we're going to work together.
Yeah, and Kamatara, you said it's almost both ways, right? And I'm gonna say it is. It absolutely is both ways. I've heard from our, I'm in Utah, and I've heard from our federal delegates the frustration of our economy. Our national budget is in an incredible deficit. And a big portion of our spending is on social services. And when I talk about antiquated systems, the structure of that is very old. It hasn't been updated, changed, and it's actually so baked in that it's not voted on anymore by our officials. Now, this is not me saying change the whole system there and get, social services like that's needed, but there is a balance. And I know that that's daunting on the side of the policymakers who have impact there to change that. Where do you start? How do you do it? Because how do you do it without the pushback of like, oh, we can't touch social services? Well, who's being impacted by that? And let me tell you, it is everyone. Because if we talk about, like, Kris, you're talking about people who maybe have had a challenge that they've experienced their whole life. So let's bring that to poverty. Let's talk about generational, intergenerational poverty. So somebody born into poverty has been influenced by the poverty mindset. They have people around them who very likely are also in poverty. So if they don't know anyone who can tell them what life is like outside of poverty, how will they ever know? A lot of people, unfortunately, are conditioned to believe like, yes, you see great things out there, and yes, there's a great opportunity, but it's not for us, right? It's not for the Smiths. This is how it's always been for us. And so settle in, it's not going to change for us, but knowing that it can. And then this is where I'm like, I know it's complicated, but I also feel like it is so simple, because if we think about a family who generationally has always been in poverty, if we can lift them up by building community around them, to introduce them to resources and education and programs, people to help them get out of poverty. And then we break that cycle, which is what we're trying to do at Circle. So if we break that cycle, how much money in our systems have we spent on supporting this family who has generationally been in poverty? If we break that cycle, so if we take that number that we've spent, and now it's let's just say one generation of that family, and then we times that by infinity, because now we've broken that cycle and they are never going back into poverty. oh my goodness, what could we do with that money? If that money comes back into our economy, what do we do with that money? I love to say, oh my gosh, could we pay our teachers more? Like that's the first thing that I would think of. Like, let's pay our teachers more. But can you like, whoa, there's the wealth, there's the solution to the deficit. Like, let's lift people out. And it's not an overnight. It's not going to happen at the snap of some fingers, right? We need to put the work in. But that is the systems change. That is the long term that I'm working towards and looking at and being super optimistic that I know we can. But it does take all of the stakeholders, all of the people who can impact, are impacted to work together and stick to it. We're going to fail. We're going to test. We're going to try it again. We're going to pivot. We're going to do something different. We're going to get there. We just have to stick to it and believe in it.
I love that, Michelle. Thank you. So we're coming to the end of our time already. I'm pretty sure, once again, I think I said this coming to the end of the time last time. We could talk about this all day.
Yes.
But I want to leave people with some practical steps. Like, okay, you've heard this podcast, you're like, yes, systems changes, people change. I want to go make some friends in places that I can either support them or be supported by them. Okay, so what next? What are the practical steps that people can take who are listening to this podcast to do something?
I'm happy to go there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say first, like, look and see if there's a local circles chapter where you live. And I say that because that's the structure's already there. It's already welcoming space for people to get to know each other, for a community to come in. That's an easy way to do it. And if there's not, get out in your community. Find a one-time volunteer opportunity that you can go get to know other people in your community who you may not have met. Look at your city council, right? Kris, you talked in the very beginning of this about looking at politics and our elected officials locally. Yes, there's a big picture. Yes, and federal, that's daunting. That's a lot. Like, how would you know everything that's going on across the country? Don't start there. Start in your community. So look for your community council or for your city council meeting schedule. Show up to one. Even if you just sit and listen and observe, listen to what's going on in your community and maybe talk to one person before you leave the space, right? And I could go on forever. If you see somebody in your neighborhood that looks like they could use some help, maybe it's an elderly person who, like, right now it's cold outside, could you shovel some snow or do some yard cleanup? Can you just knock on their door and ask how they're doing and see if they need anything, or if there's anything you can do to help them? Like, I don't think it's hard to get out. That would be my step one. Like, step one, and that in itself then creates this change. It really does.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michelle. Kamatara, what would be your practical steps?
Wow. It is all about relationships. So I was very much thinking in the same lines. Is there any way that you could get out in your community more, to know your neighbors, to volunteer at church or at the local community center? And do you even know who your representatives are? Do you know what's going on at all? Like, how could you learn? How could you engage? How could you connect? And then, is there some issue that makes your heart sing? Because we can't do everything all at once. So we need to be selective. So, maybe poverty is the thing. Maybe it's children, and children's access to healthcare, or maybe it's food insecurity, or, what is the thing that really touches your heart, that you're passionate about, and can you focus on that one thing, and then really go down that path and see what happens. So that way we're not spread too thin, but we can focus our efforts, make those connections, learn, and then see what happens, and just to stay open to be learning and growing and to make mistakes and to offer each other grace, because being in community is not easy, but it's important and it's so good.
Kris, what would you do with this challenge if you were to go out today and do something different or new?
I was sitting here going, they took all of mine. So I was trying to think of a different direction. And I would say self education, really that getting curious once again, I'm always and forever going to say that curiosity is our superpower as humanity. So what don't I know? Or maybe as you've been listening to this conversation, maybe something kind of like activated you, and either way, maybe you were like, oh my gosh, I want to learn more about that. Or maybe you had the thought, one of us said something and you were like, that's not true.
Wow.
And if that experience happened for you, what was the topic? Go find a book. Go find a podcast, another podcast. Go find a person who's doing this work. Go find your local circles chapter. Yes, always and forever. Go find somebody doing this work and learn, where am I correct in this, or maybe do I have an old belief or perspective that's no longer true, or that I've been taught. And you can even go back in yourself, like whose voice am I hearing this in? Who taught me that this was the truth about this group of people or about this thing? Why do I believe that? What happened in my life to lead me to thinking this way? And then, look at what maybe, if any of that needs to be updated along with our systems changing constantly, right? So are we. So how can I evolve and grow and educate myself more on this or any topic that something comes up for you?
Mm.
uh
Love it. Thanks, Kris.
yeah, y'all.
Michelle.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us this month, Michelle. This was such a profound conversation. I really You just have so much to offer in this field. Um, and really across the board. And I'm so glad that you were able to take time out of your very busy schedule to come join us and to talk about systems change. Thank you for the work that you're doing, because I know you're doing work in circles, right, as the executive director, but you're also doing work all across Utah where you're at. You're going to be in DC working. So, really, that starting small has grown into something so massive. And we're just so grateful for the work that you're doing and for being a part of our community. So, thank you for being here. And of course, Kamatara, I get to work with you all the time, and I'm always and forever grateful that you are, directing circles and at the head of this vision and this forward motion. So thank you both for joining us today. Thank you for this conversation, and if you are listening to this and you're like, yeah, circles, how do I find out if there's a chapter in my area? Go to circlesusa.org, and all of the information about us, more podcasts, blog posts, all kinds of things are there and available for you. Also, a great place to start educating yourself more, right? So start there, and we look forward to seeing you in our circles communities.
Thank you
Thank you
both
so
so
much.
much.